Firstly, we'll do just an orientation to Chinook Fund, a little bit about our history and the work that we do. We'll also introduce you all to our Change Not Charity framework and what that means for us at Chinook Fund and how we are oriented to this work. We'll have an opportunity for you to talk with one another in small groups about what Change Not Charity means to you. We'll also then go into deep dive into the Giving Project and what exactly the Giving Project is, how the kind of work they participate in, and we'll have some directives for you all to learn more about the program from participant perspectives. And then we'll talk through how to apply, how you can participate in the Giving Project and what that looks like, as well as our enrollment process. And then some next steps as far as how you can stay connected. So that's our overview for the day. And as we're just getting set up, again, we invite folks in the chat to just type in what brought them into the space, what made them decide to learn more about Chinook Fund and this program at this time. Marvelous. So let's see if we could maybe Barkley, I think I'm ready to be at slide 4, our history. Great. So I think Barkley actually have you on the first couple bits here for this.
Awesome. Thanks, Juliet. Yeah, because you're going to have to walk me through because I don't get to change my agenda.
Yeah.
So you all, as we're sharing with you, keep in mind that Chinook Fund feels like it's been around for a long time, but it's actually one of the younger members of what's a national network called the Funding Exchange. That's that first bullet on here. And you'll see the founding board members in the mountains at a retreat back in '87 in one of our pictures. And for many years, the Chinook Fund, we've always had a focus on social justice, community organizing, philanthropy in the state of Colorado. But for much of our history, we really worked like a traditional foundation in that we would raise dollars separately and then have a grant-making committee that would distribute those. In 2016, sorry, hold on one second. In 2016, we shifted our model like several of our sister funds, and we'll show a map in a few minutes, that was recognizing that the grant-making committee really wasn't fulfilling our mission in the ways that it could. And Giving Project, which you all are learning about today, and hopefully some of you will be joining this fall, was able to shift that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Barkley. Yeah, and with our focus too, as a social justice funder, we've been dedicated to seed funding emergent community change work. That's related to our criteria, which we'll talk about more. But our orientation as a funder, especially at looking at emergent organizing work led by folks who have experienced injustice firsthand, has allowed us to be more risky and invest in work that other traditional type of funders just didn't have the capacity for or the political alignment in terms of their understanding of community leadership. So some examples of that, Chinook Fund was the first funder to HIV and AIDS advocacy organizing work in Colorado. And to put history in context, the 1980s were not a time when there was a lot of understanding around the impacts of HIV AIDS and also a lot of anxiety and tensions around just like gay community as well as like Black communities. We were also first funder to cannabis legalization. Our funders and the grant-making committee recognized the connection between racism, criminality, and cannabis and wanted to dismantle that. So Sensible Colorado was also one of our first grantees. Just to illustrate the risks that Chinook Fund's been able to, and when I say risks, I mean more in terms of like other funders not being willing or situated yet to support that work. We've been able to lead progressive change through resourcing in that way. If you turn with me now to the next slide, this is a little bit about the funding exchange, which Barkley mentioned previously. So there are about 16 organizations that were part of the Funding Exchange Network who are a collective of funders that share this analysis of fueling community organizing work. Of those 16, about 6 have adopted Giving projects, which are the starred organizations there you can see. So Chinook Fund, even though we might seem a little bit rare in the state of Colorado, we're actually part of a national movement of organizations that are trying to transform philanthropy and invite organizations to activate their values differently in how they do grant making specifically. And I'm also happy to share that the Giving Project national collaboration has been growing and replicating. So we have new giving projects launching in the Carolinas, with a new fund called the Cypress Fund, in Detroit with a new BIPOC-led organization called Transforming Power Fund, and in Hawaii with the Hawaii People's Institute, who, just a note, will actually be joining the Fall Giving Project as peers to learn what this model looks like before they launch in January. So we're really excited to invite you all to learn more about this community with us. There's some information if you look on our website about the national network. If you're curious about this model and your fund or you're involved in philanthropy, you know, and how things can be done differently, this might be a good conversation there. Great. So I think Barkley, I have you.
I am.
Oh, cool.
Sorry,
Great.
I'm admitting someone and my computer's really slow for some reason.
Okay.
So give me 1 second.
Sure.
It's sporadically allowing me to advance the slides.
Is Mercury in retrograde?
I thought it was supposed to have ended, everyone. In the chat, chime in for us if Mercury is still mysteriously in retrograde. But... There we go. Okay, so you all, here's our mission. As Juliet and I have been describing, Chinook Fund supports grassroots organizations working on issues of social and economic justice. Again, one of the things that we are clear about in our analysis is that we can't just look at social justice or economic justice without looking at the intersection of the two. We then recognize that by pooling collective resources, that we are able to more effectively seed and provide funding to organizations to make positive systemic impact across the state of Colorado. So one of the things that we're excited about, but always challenged by, as you can imagine, is to not just limit our funding to Metro Denver or the Front Range, but really making sure that we're reaching out to rural communities, because we'll share some examples later on, or if you'll see on our website in our grantee area, one of the things that we hold a lot of pride around is that we're able to support folks working in rural parts of the state that don't historically have access to funding resources.
Mm-hmm.
Here are 4 of our values: liberation, community, integrity, and leadership. Juliet, do you maybe want to provide the details on those?
For sure. So for us at Chinook Fund, liberation means that in our words and our actions, we honor the inherent dignity, strength, and wisdom of the individual and the collective. We actively challenge practices that dehumanize and isolate people, and cultivate practices that bring people together across our differences to achieve community-led systemic change, justice, and peace. We believe everyone has a role to play in collective liberation. Our secondary value of community: we build caring, respectful relationships with one another. We recognize our interdependence, and we are committed to action that moves us all closer to our vision of liberation, connection, and abundance. We honor our relationship with the natural world, which sustains us all. For integrity, we are honest, accessible, and transparent in our work, and advocate for the same in our partner organizations and in the field of philanthropy. We understand the power and responsibility that comes with being a steward of financial resources and are accountable to our constituents. And lastly, leadership. We encourage learning, experimentation, and innovative thinking, as well as support the development of grassroots leaders. We embrace our role as leaders in the movement for social justice philanthropy and are willing to take strategic risks in service of our vision of abundantly resourced movements.
So you all, these are 3 funding criteria, and these are important because we'll get into some detail, but you can imagine one of the things that comes up every cycle for us is that there, like most funders, there's a lot more demand from folks doing really important work in community than there are dollars available. And so the Chinook Fund, through the Giving Project, really asks all the volunteers to look at these 3 key criteria. The first is constituent led, and that means we really want people to be leading that are impacted by the injustice. So some of our recent grantees in this current moment of crisis in the country is funding Black Lives Matter 5280, other Black and African-led organizations that are working on justice issues within the school system, and then those working across multiple issues, but led by Black community members out in Aurora. Mm-hmm. Another one that's key for us is community-wide. And again, we recognize that when we're looking at issues of identity, we have to look through a lens of intersectionality. It's not through a single lens that oversimplifies and reduces the complexity and the nuance of the work that's happening in the world. We really believe that we have to reflect members of all the constituency and community, and especially those that are experiencing multiple forms of oppression in their day-to-day lives. And then lastly, we want to make sure that there's lasting effect, because if this work isn't looking at systems change and is just looking at a Band-Aid type approach, that's not going to be adequate to really address the injustices and the harms that are being done every day.
Yes. And in addition to those core criteria, which every one of our organizational grantees must meet, we have a couple priorities. Barclay already mentioned rural organizations, just given the complexities of access to financial resources and the inherent challenges of working in rural community. And the second priority for us is community organizing as a strategy for change. There's many ways that groups can move forward. Sometimes that means education, sometimes that might mean advocacy, and other times some practices that are actually building power for the community might not be legible to more traditional funding models for what social change looks like. So for us, the process of community organizing is bringing people together who are affected by the issue to use our collective power. And so a key component for us is thinking about building power at the community level. And as we know from working with our organizations, that can look very different from issue to issue, from community to community. So a youth indigenous camp, for example, that's decolonizing practices and inviting youth to really center themselves in their cultural heritage practices and lift up those erased histories, is power building. And that might not look like a traditional summer camp that's college access from a different perspective, just to put things in view. Additionally, as a seed funder, all the groups that we fund need to be based in Colorado and have budgets under $350,000. And ooh, and just to put things in perspective, $350,000 was roughly Chinook Fund's budget when I came on staff. We had a staff of about 2 full-time people, a space, and we're able to run 1 leadership program, the Giving Project. So for many organizations, 350 is actually a very small threshold in terms of some of the work that groups do. And in fact, many of our organizations actually have budgets more like the median, the majority of groups have budgets more like $100,000 to $150,000, all the way down to 0, just to give a perspective there. Great. So let's talk a little bit about change, not charity. So as you can see here, we have a slide from Giving USA, which publishes survey results of charitable organizations and their funding streams. So in 2018, which is, there's actually more recent data, but this is the one that, and it's shifted a little bit, but just to give you a sense of trends, over $400 billion were donated in the US to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. Of all those contributions, the vast majority came from individuals. If you see that bottom red little arrow in that circle, almost 70% of those contributions came from people. And those are folks like you and myself who are giving out of their earned income. We're not taking a tax credit for it. And 18% are coming from foundations. Knowing too, however, how much wealth is held in foundations, this is, for us at Chinook Fund, a big shame on you in the industry, and that work organizations that are charged with stewarding collected wealth need to be better at moving those dollars for change. That said, with all that wealth that's circulating to support ostensibly injustice or folks who are disproportionately impacted by poverty, et cetera, where those dollars are going are not providing us the outcomes we hope for. So if you look on the right of that chart, most of that giving is going to religion, education, being like the lion's share of the pot. That's about almost 50%. That's about like, I think 44%. And in religious context, a lot of that funding is also going to human service work, like helping people navigate poverty. And that's not supporting the systemic roots in place as to why people are struggling with these systems. So for us at Chinook Fund, when we think about change, not charity, we think about charity in terms of addressing the symptoms of broken systems and helping people navigate them. whereas change is really looking at the core fundamental value systems, narratives, and power structures that make these ongoing injustices possible. So if $400 billion are being moved every year to address things like educational access, food insecurity, poverty, this is greater than the GDP of half of the nations in the world. If we're spending that in discretionary giving every year, why have we not yet arrived at solutions? And the reason is because our giving is flawed. We're giving to Band-Aids and not to root solutions. So we know this is a little bit to digest. That said, we'll keep this, if you downloaded the slide deck, you can view it more there. But we did want to invite people into some small groups to talk about what this meant for them. So in your small groups, we like to invite you to just talk out, and you'll have about 10 to 12 minutes for this activity. What does Change in Our Charity now mean for you? And why do you wish to get involved with us at this moment, at this time?
Well, welcome back. We hope that your small group conversations gave you a sense of how we structure much of the Giving Project. You can imagine, we know that the Chinook Fund doesn't have the collective wisdom that all of the experience that our members bring. So we'd love for just 2 or 3 folks to take a moment and share maybe a couple comments that came up in your small group. Would anyone like to start? Feel free to go ahead and just unmute yourself or throw your hand up and just give a shout out. Go for it, Mike.
Mike.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. This was at the end of ours, but Daniel brought up a piece around community and like the chasing after the definition of that, and how it changes over time, and how, sometimes we need to go searching for it and put ourselves into places that we are challenged around the idea of community and, see what that means. And I think that's I know that's a big piece for me, is why I'm interested in it, because it seems like such a unique community and one that offers a real chance to change. And I think that's interesting, and that's something that gravitates for certain people, including myself.
Great. Mike, thanks for sharing that. Daniel, thanks for bringing it up in your small group. How about 1 or 2 more folks?
I can go. Hi, I'm Molly. Yeah, I thought it was cool. There was definitely a very much like a personal connection. Like a lot of us wanting to do more within our communities, and like having had experience where watching the charity idea sort of like not really work. And really wanting to like get down to the heart of it and see some real change. And I think, especially now where we're seeing like such huge changes everywhere with COVID and with all of these social justice issues and things going on, like really wanting to hunker down in our communities and like be a part of like real action and change.
Great, thanks for that, Molly. How about one last one from someone? Maybe a non-Metro Denver person that can give us some perspective about what it's like for you showing up on this virtual space from a more rural community or non-Metro Denver community. Someone on the phone from 719, that's down in the Springs. Were you going to share with us?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Go for it.
I'm assuming you're talking to me. 719. I'm actually southeastern Colorado, rural
All right.
southeastern Colorado.
Beautiful. Represent. What? Tell us your name, please.
My name is Maria, and
right.
Yes, and I was very interested because when I shared with my group, we in the county, Prowers County, as might be familiar, where I live. Prowers County, Lamar, Springfield, Baca.
Yep.
We had an alliance of education, and it kind of dwindled down because of funding. And I think for people to be aware of community needs, they need to be educated, informed. So that's I'm excited to kind of see where this leads. Because people do not, okay, so I work in Baca County, and people do not like to ask for help. And there is a need for help.
That's right. Maria, we love that. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for calling in from southeastern Colorado. We love that. Yes, one of the exercises we will do with the participants is we have a specific exercise we go through where folks reflect on their upbringing and where they are in life now. And the title of that is called No Shame, No Blame, No Credit. Because as we all show up in the world, right, especially in rural communities, Maria, that self-help and really independent thinking, rugged individualism doesn't always serve us well, right? And because there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's no way we navigate the world by ourselves, and as much as we talk about things like self-sufficiency. So thank you so much for bringing that example to the rest of us. Yeah. Juliet, I'm going to pitch it to you for this next slide as we move back into our presentation. Sure. But thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for just sharing and having a little opportunity in small group. I know it can be challenging in a mix of strangers in 10 minutes to suddenly start sharing these things. But we do feel it's important for you all to just hear what other folks have to say to get a sense of who you might be collaborating with in a program like ours. So I also just wanted to say thank you all for lifting up the focus on community, especially in this crisis moment. I think that we are seeing very evidently that injustice affects every aspect of our lives, and for some far more than for others. And especially with the election this fall and a lot of the distraction that the federal leadership will try to throw at us to separate us, to make us fight amongst each other, it's especially important to remember the local communities for whom this is life or death, and whose voices are not being heard when we hear about the sort of like idiotic things people are saying at the national level to distract us. So your willingness to join us at this time is so essential. And to want to do this too from a personal growth standpoint, and to kind of examine these internalized attitudes and value systems that we've all inherited that have kind of kept us from doing this work at the highest level that we can with each other. So just wanted to name that. So Jess, if you're ready for slide share, great. So this is how we do it, the Giving Project. One of the things with the Giving Project that I love is that Chinook already had a dedicated commitment to resourcing social change. But the Giving Project really is the way that we can do this to hold up our values of liberation, community, leadership, and integrity at the highest level that we have found able to. So the Giving Project does many things, but it's also, as a program, meant to interrupt the problematic power relationships that can happen in philanthropy. And we do that by making lateral power in decision-making and making lateral who's able to give and support philanthropic giving. Many of us might not consider ourselves philanthropists because we might not have a class background that identifies with that name or word. And yet, community resourcing is 100% what philanthropy was intended to do. And so for us to bring the people back and center all the variety of voices and experiences that make this work possible is a way that we can shift how we even imagine what philanthropy looks like. So through the Giving Project, we're moving money to long-lasting solutions that build power and don't just address the symptoms of injustice. So if we can move to the next slide, this is a little more detail around how that looks. And Berkeley, I'll pass this back to you.
Great, thanks, Juliet. Yeah, so as Juliet said, this is an intense program. We meet 11 times over 6 months. We have added a couple meetings because, as you all are probably experiencing in this current reality, there can only be so many hours on Zoom before we just start to check out, right? And we really want folks to stay engaged. Those meetings happen over a 6-month period. So if you've seen on the calendar with the specific dates that was in the email that we sent to you all, we'll start on September 12th and we run through early March of next year. Again, it's about 100 hours of time together. 40 hours of that is through online meetings, and then 60 hours of individual work. So that individual work we'll start to get into in just a moment. And I think, Jess, if you'll click slides, Juliet's going to describe what that individual work looks like.
Yes. So there's 3 phases to the Giving Project. The first is community building and political education. For us at Chinook Fund, we're never, our histories and stories shape who we are and the values we bring forward and how we work together. And so to help foster trust, to see how are we going to make these grant allocations together, it's important that we know who's in the room and where we came from. So there's a lot of storytelling that we invite people to participate in, a lot of small group activity, and that's just opportunities for us to connect. One of the funny things about adulthood, I think, is that it actually makes it really difficult for us to make new friends. We kind of get like shoved into different like professional sectors or like class lines that kind of keep us from meeting with folks who maybe share values but come from different spaces. And this, the community building is one of the ways we kind of like flex those muscles again of listening, meeting with others who are coming from different spaces. And the political education is centered explicitly around naming and understanding white supremacy culture and what that has meant for communities of color, especially centering Black liberation and Native sovereignty. Our political education framework helps folks see the intersections between not just race and the problems of whiteness and how that has harmed others and also harmed white people, but also economic oppression and how white supremacy culture has fueled the ongoing accumulation of wealth, power, and resources at the expense of others. So we're very explicit about that. Phase 2 is our skill building phase. And that's where you get to learn more a little bit about what community organizing means for different communities and contexts. For every Giving Project, we host a Meet the Changemakers panel, where formerly funded grantee organizations come and speak to our volunteer community and their friends. It's a public invitation, so you can invite all your potential donors to hear with you about this work, to talk about what community organizing looks like from their perspectives and in their constituencies. Native organizing work looks very different in Metro Denver than it does in the Ute territories of Southwest Colorado. Black-led organizing work looks really different depending on if it's focused on community resourcing and mutual aid and healing work versus holding decision makers accountable for police violence. So same constituencies, different focus areas, different ways of convening and growing power. So the opportunity to hear directly from community leadership around the nuances of the work is so helpful for all of us to help address, I think, some of the unacknowledged filters we have around what good, quote, good work looks like. And it really allows us to center constituent leadership in the solutions that are being provided in the grant applications that they're putting forward. So that's one of the skill areas. The other skill area is fundraising. So all of the grant dollars are raised by the collective of Giving Project members. And as folks who are very service-oriented and community-focused, it's really challenging for many of us to ask for what feels like help, when really what we're doing is inviting you to connect your passion to your skills as an advocate and having value-based conversations with people about this work and educating them around why charitable giving, though essential, is also fundamentally problematic, and that we need to all consider shifting how we think about giving to supporting more of the root cause organizing work, which often has uncertain outcomes, unclear timelines, and active resistance from power holders. So the fundraising is really a way of organizing, and it's organizing people around their giving to recognize that giving is activism. So that's the way that we train folks in developing their fundraising skills. There's a lot of materials other places offer around how to do internet fundraisers or create social media campaigns. our focus is in community organizing. So we'll be training you to have conversations with people you already know and care about, and inviting them into thinking more deeply about this work and giving. And with the skill building is also our grant making. So we train all the folks in the criteria. We have several modules that help them kind of dive into the nuances of what community organizing means in different contexts. We have several systems at Chinook Fund that are technological that we train you all in how to use and engage with, to be grant makers, to evaluate from your own perspectives and standpoints what seems like valuable work moving forward. And then phase 3 is the action phase. And that's where you all go off and do the things that you signed up to do. So you'll be fundraising from your friends and community, inviting them to talk about what Change Not Charity means to you and to them, inviting them to give to the grant fund. You'll also be grant making. You'll receive a docket of grant applications, spend some time reviewing each of those thoughtfully, and we'll have screening conversations where you will, as a collective, decide using a consensus model which organizations move forward to be finalists for site visits. And then after conducting the site visits, which organizations will ultimately be allocated grants. And again, all of our decision-making at Chinook Fund is consensus-based, which allows us to make sure that minority opinions get to be heard and really deliberated and contended with before a final decision is made. So consensus is not unanimity. Consensus is a process that everyone engages in that provides an outcome that everyone can support and agree with. So those are the action phases. And if we could turn to the next slide, and I do see some questions which we'll definitely get a chance to address.
Yes, I think I'll take this one, Juliet.
Yes,
you were on a roll.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. So there are some great questions coming up in the chat about availability. We realize that everyone is busy and has multiple commitments. And so we understand if folks have to miss a session here or there. While we really encourage folks to join and be available for 100%, we just know that that's not the reality for so many folks. And so following these meetings and after folks submit their applications, Juliet and I hold one-on-one individual interviews to really talk through. And if it looks like this is just not the right time for you, we'll really say, hey, let's hold off and wait, because we know that if someone, for example, we just had someone in our last cycle, they were super excited, they took a new job, and they knew that there was no way they were going to be able to fully participate and commit. So these are the dates. Again, we mentioned that we've really tried to limit our sessions to 3 to 4 hours, because we know that Zoom fog brain just starts to kick in by about 3 hours. We do build in a lot of cool activities, such as small groups. We also try to encourage folks to get up, move around, and do some things to engage brains differently. But as we work through this schedule of dates, you heard Juliet describe the different skills. And so you can see how these first set of meetings, in terms of laying the groundwork, introduction to philanthropy, introducing and understanding race and class in early October, grassroots fundraising, social justice giving, that's really the bulk of our skill building. We then on November 17th have a Meet the Changemakers event, where I saw there was a great question about how do our grantees shared. Yes, so one of the things that we love to do is create opportunities for folks to learn about the amazing organizations and leaders that most folks in Colorado don't even know are out doing work every year, day in, day out. And so that's what Meet the Changemakers allows. And then Juliet described the grant making. You all are the folks that are participating, that are raising the dollars and also responsible for conducting those site visits and reviewing the grants and having those tough conversations about where's the money going to go. So it's really about engaging in that process. And then on September 13th, we'll have our final decision meeting. There are stars on both that December 15th and February 13th meeting, because Juliet, Jess, and I experienced that you all can imagine in our spring cohort that just wrapped up online, there was some really great dialogue, and folks could not get, when Juliet talks about that consensus process, for many of you all that have experienced consensus, you can't force that, right? And so you just have to allow it to be organic and really get folks to where they need to be. And so we needed to create some additional times. And so we really tried to do that in a way that respects participants' time and honors that, but really recognizing that there's got to be a little bit of flexibility in the process. And then we wrap up on Tuesday, March 2nd from 6 to 8 p.m. It's hard to believe we'll be there before we know it to celebrate and evaluate. because again, there's a lot that's worth celebrating and evaluating, even in the midst of crisis and challenging times. So next slide, Jess.
And we will have a Q&A, and I see those questions. We'll answer those after we get through these next few slides. So just to give a sense of impact and scope, this is a map of organizations that Chinook Fund has funded, both active and current. And through the Giving Project alone, we've been able to raise over $750,000 that have gone out directly to community organizing groups that are constituent led and working on long-term change, and funded over 80 organizations. And all of that work was done by folks just like yourself who felt activated around their values and wanted to make a significant commitment of their time and their resources and build community with one another. You can also find this map on our website under grantees if you're interested in learning more. And if you hover your browser, your cursor over any of those and click on it, it'll give you more information about that organization. So that's just a sense of our broader footprint. And our commitments to also just expanding our outreach across the state to make sure that those rural organizations, especially those led by Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color communities, are being left behind out of these opportunities for support. Next slide. Great, so I'll pass this to Berkeley.
Thanks, Juliet. So again, you all have heard us mention it a few times, but all of our meetings will be on Zoom. So this is a wonderful platform, and obviously it's not perfect. So we appreciate you all meeting us at our imperfection, and we'll do the best to meet you all there. Again, one of those key areas is we really try to keep it about 3 hours. Site visits, one of the beautiful things that Zoom has allowed is it allowed for much easier facilitation and scheduling of site visits, because in the past, if there was a rural organization, Giving Project members would have to commit to driving down to rural Colorado, sometimes spending the night, and then getting back. And so technology really facilitated that. We do very intentionally work to accommodate folks being in different spaces. We know that sometimes folks are parenting, and as we've all seen online or experienced with coworkers or friends and colleagues, having kids run into the screen is something that we loved, because we would wave to those beautiful family members and say, thanks for supporting your mom or dad or your parent for participating in this. Meal reimbursements. Obviously in the past, when we know that for feeding and caring of folks, good food is key. And we're very intentional about supporting primarily women-led cooperatives and restaurants. Now that we're not meeting in person, we still want to make sure that if folks need in their life to be able to not have the burden of prepping a meal, that reimbursement is available. Technology is also available because we know that, again, right, especially in rural parts of the state, that broadband access isn't great. Sometimes folks in Metro Denver on the Front Range need a Wi-Fi hotspot. Let us know, because if you all let us know, then we'll do what we can to accommodate those requests. Next slide, Jess.
Great. So the goals of the Giving Project are, we have 5, to move significant money to social justice organizing in Colorado. This is the type of work that traditionally isn't exciting for funders to give to, because the nature of it inherently challenges the status quo. And that can be uncomfortable for people with accumulated wealth. So, and the project managers that have discretion over how those funds are allocated. So for us to robustly move money to those constituencies is the top goal for us. The second one is to build community. And I would also add to build the movement. So building community across lines in terms of difference, in terms of who's participating in the Giving Project, getting to learn from one another, finding folks who share these values, but also building community across all of us, wherever we're based, with grantee organizations. So meeting with them through the site visits is one of the wonderful takeaways for many of our Giving Project participants, getting to hear in person and have time with leaders working on issues they had no knowledge about before. And so building the movement too means not just supporting the constituency leadership, but recognizing all of you are justice leaders where you're based, and then providing you with more of the skills in terms of anti-oppression analysis, understanding of white supremacy, and also having peer network, knowing that there's people who are actively engaged in doing this work and can support you in the challenges you face is essential for us. The third is educating ourselves about the current challenges and the potential of social justice around these issues through an anti-racist lens. This work is ongoing and it's not always easy. And so having nuanced understanding of the complexities allows us to participate and be thoughtful about our engagement to, better. The fourth is to develop our skills as donor organizers. At Chinook Fund, we're very clear that a key problem is money and that we need to move it. And we also need to help people get more comfortable with talking about it, which is one of our goals too with our donor organizing framework and how we train you all to be fundraisers. And lastly, to create a sustainable new model of funding critical, underfunded social change work. And I'm really proud to share that since we've adopted this model, Chinook Fund has been able to deeply increase the amount of grant dollars we're giving out each year. Prior to the Giving Project, we were maxing out at around $100,000 a year. And this year alone, I think we moved close to $350,000 for grants. So every cycle looks a little different, but our trend overall is to be able to resource organizing work at a higher level because of this model. Next slide. And I'll pass this to Berkeley.
Thanks, Juliet. Yeah, so there's some great questions coming in the chat. And so a few of these we'll start to answer right now before we get to Q&A. One of the commitments is that we ask you all to be willing to grow and learn, right? None of us has it all figured out as much as we would like to think we do in any moment. And so this is one of the things that we found through the Giving Project is folks really appreciate, as Juliet mentioned earlier, right? One of those strange things about our society is we just don't really get that opportunity to connect as adults with folks that might not be in our circles the way we did when we were younger. We really, again, we said it and we'll speak to it a little bit more, but the goal is to have everyone attend all of the sessions because there's just a layering, like an onion of resources and information and context, that much of this work isn't just about the content itself, but about the relationships that are built during it. Because we're asking you all as participants to step in and be vulnerable, not only with us as facilitators and Chinook staff and with the organizations, but with each other. And that can look different if folks have to miss a meeting or two. We ask for folks to make a personal donation, and through the Giving Project, we call those meaningful gifts. That's important because it shows that folks are committed and bought in at whatever level. We literally have had folks give $5 or $10 all the way up to tens of thousands. And that's really based off of their own personal capacity. And again, speaks to maybe they have some family, historical, inherited class privilege, whereas another participant may not have that experience. We also ask folks to fundraise in their friend, family, and coworker networks. You all know people and are powerful when you own that power and agency to say, hey, this is an issue I care about, or this is something I'm doing. We've literally had friends and family say, I never thought I would have a conversation about race and class with my family the way that we did, but because of the Giving Project, I was able to have that, especially in this moment. That dollar amount also then reinforces that this isn't just an academic or head conversation. This is really about how are we bringing our heads, our hands, and our hearts into the work. We then ask you all, as Juliet said a few minutes ago, to review grant materials. This is not necessarily an easy process, but it's an important one because in the past, philanthropy created this mythical black box of an organization, and many of you all work in or are familiar with nonprofit organizations. And folks will say, who decides how the funding happens? And it doesn't really make sense. We want to pull back the curtain and get you all to step in as grant makers with us and donor organizers to say, okay, this is how the funding process is working. So that then when you're in other spaces or wearing other hats, either as a board member of an organization, as a staff member, as a volunteer, or a donor, you have a sense of how that process works. We ask folks to commit to at least making 2 site visits. And again, some of the great questions are coming up in the chat. We want that to happen because then it really allows, and we got some great feedback from some of our grantees as well as the Chinook Fund is trying to be progressive and minimize a power dynamic between grantees and grantors. We had an organization this last cycle say to us, hey, a couple of the ways the questions were framed didn't feel like it was in the spirit of Chinook. What's up with that? And we had to say, we appreciate the feedback, thank you. But you all will help us build that context in that container as well. We ask for a lot of evaluation after every session and at the end. We know that it's not always the most fun thing to do, to share and have to think back and self-reflect, but reporting your findings and experience really gives us great feedback to help to inform the program as we move forward. I think I'm passing back to you, Juliet, for the national movement piece.
Yeah, so there's I think there's just.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, am I doing this? I'll do this one and then you pass it to you for national. Again, you've heard us talk about a little bit about this. We really take seriously this first bullet to create an inclusive space, because if we're being honest, none of us has this figured out. And so we really need to learn from each other. And sometimes we're going to put our foot in our mouths, whether that's literally or virtually on Zoom. And we have to go, oops, sorry, I apologize. That was not my intent. And I apologize for that impact. We do a lot of work to organize the logistics, because obviously we know that this takes time and resources, and we want to make sure that this is as smooth and accessible for you all, because the 100 hours is intense, and especially when it's stacked off of family commitments, life, everything else, work. We coordinate all the trainings so that, again, there's a lot of content that goes into this. Juliet and I are regularly having a tug of war about, I want to include just tons of resources, and Juliet's like Barkley. No one's reading all that stuff, but we want to include it because it's important. We thoughtfully build out agendas, and we respect you all's time. So again, we really work to be very consistent and start on time and end on time. And if we're going to run over, we always ask for folks, recognizing that sometimes folks have family or work commitments, that if we're going to go over time, that we'll circle back around with those individuals. We do a lot of work. And again, Jess is one of the wizards on our team that does so much on the back end to really help with our grant making and fundraising efforts. There are multiple systems and platforms that we use, including a grant portal that you all will have access to, and several different fundraising platforms. And so we use those to really allow those tools to empower you to leverage your power with your friends, family, and coworker networks. We also accept feedback, because we know that we can't effectively continue to be leaders in the state of Colorado or in our national network if we're not hearing critical responses to what we're not doing well. And then lastly, staff are here as resources for the project, because you can imagine, right? We have folks that are like, I had no idea that this is something that I was maybe showing up with, and would love to be able to talk with you a little bit more about it. Or, oh my gosh, I have never had to fundraise before. I'm scared to death. Can you help talk me through that? And so while some of our activities do that, Juliet and I are also available to do that one-on-one. All right, Jess, now Juliet's up.
Yes, and this is our last slide before questions. So some other logistics we wanted to be transparent about, that this is not a fee to join or a program that you pay to participate in. We do invite everyone to make a donation, but that's, again, a meaningful gift, but that's based in what your comfort level and capacity to give is. That's not considered like a fee for service or participation. Also, we wanted to be clear that Chinook Fund does retain 15% of the fundraised pool. So all the dollars that are raised do not go out the door. Some of those dollars stay with Chinook Fund to help us cover the cost of this program. And so just to be clear, what some of those costs look like are facilitator compensation. Barkley's 3/4 time, I'm full-time staff. We also have 2 contracted facilitators, a White Caucus facilitator and a Black Caucus facilitator, who support both our members and our alumni community in ongoing anti-oppression work and just like community learning with one another. The accessibility support, wait, what's this? Oh yeah, and that's my salary, just to give you some sense of like what our pay looks like. And I'm the program director. Also to cover the accessibility costs. So childcare reimbursements, meal reimbursements, tech access. We're definitely investing in some more Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots for people to be able to participate, things of that nature. Also stipends for interns and organizational leaders who share their expertise. So our grantee panel, Meet the Change Makers, everyone who's sharing their leadership with us is compensated for that expertise. That's very important to us. And as well as all the back end, just like collateral and system support to make sure that this program operates. So that's where the 15% goes. So we just wanted to be clear about that, because I think sometimes just what organizational costs look like are not always transparent. So let's stop the screen share now and just open up some questions before we talk about next steps and the movement. And I saw here a couple questions. Maybe Barkley and I could alternate on these. So the first one was from Mike. Do you publish or share the organizations that are awarded Giving Fund grants and how much they receive? Yes. So on our website, there is a grantees list, and the most recent year's grantees are listed there, as well as the amounts. And we also make a public notice through our seed notes and online publications and platforms to our participants. And so this last cycle, for example, our Spring Giving Project was able to distribute out around $100,000 to 16 different organizations, 2 of which were second-year grants. So organizations that had been funded before and were automatically receiving a second year of support from Chinook Fund. So we do that. You can find that on our grantees page. Barclay,
Thanks, Juliet. Yeah, Hannah, great question about funds distribution. I think you saw that in the slide, that 15% is held back. And then we're also actively fundraising. So Chinook currently, if you go to our website, or many of you all might have seen on our webpage, is fundraising for an effort called the Another World is Possible Fund. So we're doing that to get resources during the pandemic out to organizations that desperately need them. And then we also operate to raise some additional general operating support dollars, because as Juliet shared, she and I work specifically on this program, but Jess, our donor organizer, Marie, and our executive director, Crystal, are all doing work that goes beyond the Giving Project or complements and supports it. So great question.
I also kind of hear that question as, are there other pockets of money that go out the grant making dollars with the Giving Project? And the answer is no. That's part of our community accountability. When folks sign up to do this work, there's no secret parachute that we have. There's no secret progressive major donor that's going to come in and save the day if you got too scared and in your feelings to ask people to give $15 to $50, you know? So when you sign up to do this work, we're asking you to be brave and put your values before your sense of fear and personal anxiety, to be an advocate on behalf of these communities that literally don't have access to the sorts of folks you do, or the financial resources that you are in community with through various degrees of separation. So there is a little bit of that sweat of wow, I am part of a collective that's charged with holding this responsibility. And Giving Projects have raised anywhere from $35,000 to $250,000, depending on who's in the room. And our grantee applicants know that, and they know that our grant levels look a little different depending on the giving capacity of the cohort. And it also, I think, requires a sense of accountability on our part to not just learn about these things, but to take action and being committed to the financial resources these groups need. And we have very rarely been able to fund all the grant amount requests for the winning organizations. And that just gives you a sense of the challenges of this work. And just a last note around that, the far right, they have no qualms about asking them to give and to give generously. There's literally hundreds of millions of dollars that are moving right now through PACs, for far right leadership. QAnon supporters are getting into national platforms. They are clear about what their money can do. And our invitation through the Giving Project is for us to put aside our anxiety around talking about money and actually resource the work.
Great, thanks, Juliet. I'll take Shelby since, oh, go ahead,
Yeah, we've got
Jess.
a couple more questions that I've just been collating.
Yeah.
In non-pandemic years, are there options to participate virtually?
Yes, Shelby, you're asking us to have a crystal ball that we don't have. I would share with you that we've committed to do this through March. I think for our spring cohort next year, we're not 100% sure what that would look like yet, because we're just like everybody having to make some decisions about how do we support you all as participants in the Giving Project and grantees in a way that's most effective as we all juggle both this health and economic crisis. So would love to be able to give you a more definitive answer, but we'll revisit it down the line. I would let you know that we, fortunately, Juliet and our executive director, Crystal, were very clear. I was literally on a call yesterday with an academic institution, and as many of you all are experiencing, folks are sort of waiting and then having to change their decision. Juliet and Crystal were very clear of, let's just go to Zoom so that we're not making you all as participants have to juggle and change plans at the last minute. So we're committed through this through March of next year. We'll revisit as things shift. Juliet, you want to take that next one from?
Oh, I see, from Molly.
From Molly,
so,
yep.
Where does the name Chinook Fund come from? This is a great question. So our founding board members and participants back in 1987 were the ones who devised that name. The word itself is actually from a native First Nations community, and it means winds of change. I will express there has been some tensions internal at Chinook Fund that we are using a native word and not representative of the geography in which that community, that language practice is based, and it felt a little problematic to us. So just know that I love the idea of the winds of change, and also I have personally, all the staff I think feel the same way. We have question marks around it, so it's just yeah, it's something we sit with. Cool.
Our next one is coming from Olivia about final application due date. Jess, do you want to answer that one for Olivia?
I interpreted that as final application for the Giving Project.
You're right.
But for the grant making, the application due date is September 21st.
Okay, yeah, for the Giving Project specifically for this fall cohort.
Yeah, Olivia, thanks. We are, if you look on the application in our information, we take applications on a rolling basis. So we're coming up, our goal is to enroll 25 to 28 folks. We're probably at about 16 to 18 right now. And again, part of what we're looking at is we want to have the right mix of folks. So you can imagine, right, for many of in nonprofit spaces in Colorado, it tends to look a lot like the demographics of this screen, right? Molly, when you're talking about what the screen looks like, it's mostly white women, hetero, cisgender. And we, as an organization that really looks at identity and intersectionality, wants to really mean, when we talk about equity, that there are equitable voices in the room. So we do have a rolling and equity-based application process that allows us to try to get that. So as soon as you all can get it in, but then know that we have folks that applied last fall, and Juliet and I are in the middle of having a conversation with them of, does it work to be in their schedule right now? So it's rolling. Yeah, we don't believe in deadlines at Chinook. We only believe in only lifelines, Olivia. Only lifelines.
Okay. Except when it comes to getting money in and getting it out.
That's
there
right.
You go.
and Juliet has me and Jess have me on some deadlines once in a while. I don't like them, but I abide by them.
I don't like deadlines too, but I guess I'm a director for a reason.
Gotta get it done. Go ahead, Juliet.
Well, I see a question from Kirsten. Is the expectation we'll fund with within our Colorado networks or people across the country and externally? Definitely open door. You know, we of course appreciate when people are able to have conversations with folks who are based here, just because I think the impacts are a little bit more personal as far as being place-based. But we've had people give from Canada, India, I want to say the UK, and a couple other places. So it also just depends on your personal network. You know, people connect in the ways they do, and not everyone who donates is going to be based in the state. So that's not an expectation. We do prioritize participants who are based in Colorado as far as joining the Giving Project. But if you're out of state and have a strong connection to this community and feel that you can advocate passionately for folks that are doing work here, that's like a conversation as part of the application with us.
Yeah, just to add on that, we'll give you a couple examples. We've had some of our alumni in GP that they chose to fundraise through their college or university alumni network, and it was amazing how, I think she was a member of a sorority, and she leveraged that network and blew through every goal she set, and literally at that time set a record for Chinook in terms of single gifts into an individual. Same thing for connecting with families, right? If someone grew up outside of Colorado on the East Coast or in California or up in Washington and relocated here either for college and university or to work, those family networks, we love for folks to be able to say, hey, will you support me in this? Because then the great thing that it also can do, back to the map that we showed you earlier, is it can give those family members the opportunity to go, wow, I didn't even know growing up in New York that the North Star Fund existed, or Bread and Roses in Philadelphia, or Social Justice Fund up in Seattle and Portland, right? We're all seeing the images of what's going on in Portland right now. We're in this critical moment, and a lot of folks don't realize that a lot of this work has been taking place for years. And so how do we support each other in ways that may not always make the nightly news, but is important to let folks that we know and love and care about that's going on?
And I did want to say a last thing too about the fundraising is that we don't set quotas for our members to fundraise. Everyone takes some personal reflection to think about like their fundraising capacity and come up with a goal that they feel like is a little bit of a stretch for them and shows some accountability to helping to support the movement, but it's also within their capacity. So, you know, we're not going to say to the group, you're going to raise X dollars. It's through our one-on-one check-ins with everyone that you arrive at a personal goal that you'll be fundraising towards and how many conversations you want to have. And we collate that to come up with a collective goal. So even our fundraising process in terms of like what the ultimate outcome should look like is really dependent on the cohort and how they're seeing like their ability to support this. We do have a couple more minutes left just for Q&A before we move into next steps and how to join. Are there any other burning questions? And it looks like we're small enough at this point, just because some folks had to step off, that you can just unmute yourself if you like and ask your question. Yes, Daniel, please.
Unmuting. So how would you all sort of rate yourselves, or when you look at your past, how much change in the real world have you accomplished? And I don't mean like gotcha, I mean, how's it going?
Change is a process, right? And so one of the organizations, if you go on to the Chinook website that we love, is an organization called the Land, I'm gonna butcher it, the Land
Rights Council.
Thank you, Juliet. Land Rights Council literally has been a Chinook grantee for close to 30 years. And so again, that lets you know that their budget never got over 350,000, right? For many of us in the sector or in our capitalist society, the question is scale. How are you gonna scale and take your startup program to $1 million a year budget? That isn't the reality for a lot of our organizations. I bring up the Land Rights Council because they, after 40 years, it was the longest running civil court case in the state of Colorado's history, won their case. And that win only happened in 2016. And so we love to have their executive director come and share at Chinook events. We had her speak at an event back in October, and her 15 minutes became 45 because it was there was so much awesome just experience that she was able to share as an elder. And again, right, not just talking about the range of how things work. Again, you can imagine, right, in this moment, Black Lives 5280 started in 2013, 2014 after Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, and a lot of the other young men that in that public moment, they had lulled a little bit. And after this George Floyd murder, they have been completely inundated. And so there's an ebb and a flow to movement building. And so those are some anecdotal examples, Daniel. And then other times it feels like we're spitting in the wind, right? And when we look at the national moment right now and what's going on in Portland, or even what we see in Colorado sometimes, it can feel overwhelming and daunting. And so one of the other things that we love at Chinook is we're able to say, okay, we can't fix the entire really horrible things that have gone on for hundreds of years all over the world or all over the United States, but we can commit to doing that here in Colorado and along the Front Range. So those are some things that we try to do. Juliet, would you add a couple thoughts?
Definitely. Well, in terms of long-term change, I will say too that sometimes it comes in surprising ways. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which was finally passed in 1990, was because of the direct action efforts of one of our grantees, Atlantis Adapt, which hosted on the street active, like stopping transit, blocking buses because of lack of accessibility. They also were quite famously arrested out of Mitch McConnell's office in 2017 when they were trying to defund Medicaid. So sometimes tiny is very mighty because they can be radical. They can do things that more established and traditionally oriented organizations aren't able to do. Also like the Second Chance Center, which Chinook Fund was the first organization to fund them. They support primarily like Black men coming out of the correction system to advocate on behalf of resources for those who have finished their terms, to address systemic racism in corrections, and to do this from like an equity perspective. And they Hassan Latif, who himself had been incarcerated, used to drive around in a van and just like hand out cards to folks who'd been released to connect them to resources. And now they got a budget line in the Department of Corrections in Colorado to fund ongoing support for people who've come out of the system. So those changes can look very different, whether on a local level or nationally. And the last thing I'll say too is just cannabis legalization, the decriminalization of it. Colorado has been a leader on that. And it's been incredible that we were able to support that early on. And as far as like lasting change, I will say many of our startup grant organizations might not make it past 5 years as an institution, as a formally organized collective of people. However, the investment in their leadership is long lasting. So even if the organization comes and goes, the people who've been engaged and the leadership skills and the analysis they develop remains, and they grow that movement in different ways. So when we talk about people power, we really mean it as far as like long-term impacts. But thank you, Daniel. That was a very rich question.
Yeah, I also just want to add, I shared in the chat a link to a timeline that we put together for our 30th anniversary. Of course, we can't claim that like we directly caused a lot of the like amazing change work that our grantees have contributed to. There is like a nice documentation of the things that have happened in the landscape of social justice in Colorado over the last 30 years.
So we are going to move into the just next steps and logistics because we do want to be mindful of time. So we're going to go back to a screen share. But if you have other questions, please do feel free to reach out to myself or Barkley. Our information is at the end of the slide deck as well as online. So Barkley, I think I'll take this one if you take the next slide.
Sounds
great. So again, just an iteration of like the fact of joining a giving project is not just helping out in Colorado, but really joining a network of organizations who have a dedicated commitment to funding social change across the country. So on the far right, there is a list of all the places where giving projects are based. I do want to say that the Boston-based giving project is with Grassroots International, and that's actually an international seed funder. So that's supporting like Palestinian liberation work and other justice-based efforts internationally. So that's just to give you a sense of like this broader network that you're participating in when you're joining our program. Next slide.
I'll just mention really quickly, you all, you can imagine over 6 months, we are now up to, as Juliet said, I think about 170 folks that have participated. So our alumni network is a vibrant place, whereas folks get energized and excited about this work and build wonderful relationships and connections, they're able to stay involved. So again, you'll see some ways that that can happen, not only in supporting each other through community caucuses, being on different panels. Juliet has some examples here of community wealth building, ethical communication, and hotspots in contemporary organizing. And lastly, Chinook Fund is always celebrating new grantees or new giving project participants. So we invite folks that are alumni to come back regularly. Next slide, Jess.
So this is just some testimonials from our participants. And if you've been on our website, you can also see that we have a short documentary that was made tracking one of our early cohorts to get a sense of what the experience of the Giving Project is like and what it felt like for the people who are engaged. So if you're interested in more of an alumni point of view, we encourage you to check out the Giving Project documentary. And pictured here is Larita Cavanis, who's one of our early alumni participants and now runs her own organization, Adolescents Know Your Rights, which is focused on primarily Black and Brown youth, derailing the school to prison pipeline. Next slide.
So again, for many of you all, you've asked how to join. Please feel free to click on our website and on the section under Giving Project, you'll see a screen that looks like this. It says Learn More and Apply. You just go ahead and click that button. It'll put you into a Google Forms document that asks a number of questions. Because again, as we shared, we know that we're trying to get as wonderful and inclusive, diverse group of folks as possible in terms of lived experience, geographic representation, socioeconomic, and racial and ethnic status. Next slide, Jess.
Yeah, so after you apply, either Barkley, myself, or an alumni member will reach out within 2 weeks to interview you. That interview is just an opportunity to answer any further questions you have that emerged after your time just processing all of this information, and to provide like clarity around expectations of what this experience is like with us. and also to connect with just like some of our community. Barkley and I will be the lead facilitators for the fall cycle. And there'll be a couple other folks who participate to support the facilitation in different ways, but we'll be the main folks. So in the meanwhile, we invite you all to stay connected with us through our monthly digital newsletter, Seed Notes, and to just check out our website and to definitely refer folks to us. And I think the next slide's the last one. Yay. So we're right at 1:30.
Right at 1:30. So yeah, we won't go long. Just you feel free to shoot me an email. Our phone number for all of us is there, 303-455-6905. I think most of you have our website. And then again, to apply is the website /Giving Project.